I want you to imagine a pastor who has been preaching for 20 years and building up this congregation, all to sit down one day and find out that they have about 60 days of cash left. That's happening right now, more than you think. So if your church is struggling financially, I want you to know you're not alone. It's not a moral failure. It's a money problem. And money problems have solutions.
Yes, this is a very near and dear topic, and one that we've thankfully been able to help many churches, many ministries kind of overcome this money problem and get on the other side, because you're absolutely right. I mean, when you think of a church or a ministry, they want to do lots of things. And I've got them actually all written down. They want to help people. They want to serve families, mentor the youth. They want to feed communities. They want to help support addictive recovery. And they want to basically disciple people. They want to help people. But from my understanding and what we've seen from the churches that we've been able to fortunately help, they spend a lot of their meetings and a lot of their time worrying about how they're going to make payroll, how they're going to pay the utilities and service the mortgage and service the bank debts and the maintenance and the production costs and survival, really, as you mentioned. And that takes time and energy away from their core purpose. And I think a lot of that really comes down to control. I think you mentioned that. Control. Yeah. The church, is, especially since COVID really, unearthed some of these weaknesses, but they've literally given up control of the financial piece, and the money that comes into the church has to go out the door. So there's never enough money to do the things that they really want to do. But that's an easy shift, and that's what I want to talk about today. What is your take on some of that?
Well, I think that what I'm seeing is that the churches are in a financial crisis, but what's making it worse is nobody's talking about it. It's in silence. And because it's in silence, we don't even realize, even myself as a church member who absolutely loves the work that the church does, until this conversation came up with you and I just a couple of weeks ago, and I started really talking to some ministers, I had no idea that the struggle was going on. I mean, you just don't think about it. You just think they're there to, give you some word, communion, worship, and then you go home. But keeping all of that running, it's a real struggle, and I wasn't aware.
Yeah, well, you had your event, the fantastic event at this beautiful, beautiful church. And, when you walk into the church, it's all new. It's just absolutely just breathtaking, but, you and I were talking that, that church, even though, it was big, it was just beautiful, they struggle with a lot of the things we're going to talk about today. And I want to I've got several case studies, but there's one church that we started working with. The pastor of the church is in, our community, understands the infinite banking concept, uses it for his own personal life, and came to us and said, can you guys do this for a nonprofit for our church? And we said, absolutely. It doesn't matter whether it's an individual or a business or a nonprofit, as long as we have an insurable interest. And he said, well, because I'm the pastor, is there an insurable interest? And we said 100%. Because if you are gone, the church has a financial struggle to replace you. They have to go out, they have to maybe hire recruiters or spend time and energy finding someone to replace you, training that person, bringing them into this culture. And that is all, that all means that the church has an insurable interest. So what we did is we put together, and this took a very long time. I just want to preface, because there was many moving parts. This particular church was in a growth phase. They were opening multiple locations, and they were doing this using bank financing. But the church was also well capitalized. They had good reserves, which is not the case for every church, but this one was unique, where they had good money coming in. But what they wanted to do is they wanted to get away from giving money to the banks. And I actually have the numbers. This is their expansion plan. And he used this one. He said, there's a $500,000 building project we're doing right now. And we've gone to the bank. The bank is willing to lend the money because of our cash flow, but they're at 7% interest. And a 20-year loan, mortgage for opening this expansion, this other location, a 20-year loan at 7%, the interest over that 20 years that the church would pay to the bank is $430,000. Think about that. It's a $500,000 total loan, and the bank is going to earn $430,000 in just interest. So the whole thing I'm trying to say, because a lot of people are like, well, that's just what it is. But that isn't what it is. That's what it is if you give up control. This particular church, this particular pastor said, we no longer want to give up control. How do we create our own private banking system within this church so that the expansion into the future, that interest, we'll still pay that interest, which we can, but we're going to pay that interest back to our own private banking system. And that's what we set up. So we went through the process of building their system, their private banking system, so that then in the future, and it's not going to happen overnight, but in the future, they're going to be able to finance all of their own growth and continue to build. And then the other thing too, this is the one thing that this pastor particularly understood. He said, I'm in my 60s. I'm not going to live forever. Someday I get to go home. I get to go home to the maker, and when I do, I want to leave this church in a better place. Now, there's lots of ways people could imagine doing that, leaving a church in a better place. I mean, you could give your time, your service. You could, attend all the events, and you could serve in lots of ways. But imagine this pastor in this example, the day this pastor goes home, the day this pastor passes away, there's a death benefit, a large death benefit that will be paid to the church, enabling the church to expand rapidly. It's no different than, I don't mean to throw the Rockefellers into the mix of this, but the reason the Rockefeller family has continually gotten wealthier and wealthier over the decades is because of exactly what we're talking about here. But now we're talking about this in the sense of a church and a ministry being able to take back control of their money, being able to create their own banking system, private banking system, where when they expand, they go into their own banking system. They take a loan from their banking system to expand, to buy the building, to build whatever it is they want. They make payments, but all the payments go back to the church-owned policy, which is building the policy, which is increasing the death benefit, which is fulfilling on the same goal they started with. And I think these are the things that there's very few people talking about this. And I'd love to kind of shepherd the way in talking about this more. And here we are, addressing this to your community, which is the perfect community for this. Mm-hmm. But all it takes is getting the churches, across the country to understand this is possible, to understand that they can do this. They're already spending the money. The money's going to just the wrong bank, right? They're giving it to somebody else's bank. They can create their own banking system. So what do you think about that particular scenario?
Well, I think I had never heard of this before. And that's the whole point of bringing new information to the channel, because we do have a lot of people that are not only in the church, but they are pastors. And I feel like they need to hear this information. But when you are talking about churches that have savings accounts, and I see that a lot, they have even maybe a small savings account. But when I think about infinite banking and this concept, that would be wonderful that they are piling that money up in these policies rather than actually, saving it in the bank, getting ready for that church remodel or, new carpet, which is usually what I hear a lot, new pews, or having, just new decor put around the church. I'd never thought about that they would be able to put that savings into these policies, let them be growing, then take the loan from themselves. I mean, if I hadn't thought of that, I know people that's watching right now has not ever thought of that as a possibility, because you don't think about a minister being insurable as far as for, this nonprofit, which is the church. Let me ask you a question. Are the elders considered insurable for this?
Yes, they are.
Wow. Okay. That would be, I can really see how this would change up the church.
I mean, think about it. The elders are essential for the church's operations and for the church's future. So, of course, the church has the nonprofit is what, when we say the church, I'm referring to the entity, the nonprofit has a very vested interest in the elders, in the minister, in the pastors. Like they all of those folks play a major part in that church's future, that nonprofit's future. So the nonprofit, the church, certainly has an insurable interest in all of them and could do a policy on each one. But I want to preface, like, because I know a lot of people, like, they want to always drift to the negative. You know, a lot of people listening, you know, this isn't about investment chasing. This isn't about getting rich. This isn't about shortcuts. This isn't about stock market replacement. This is simply about being smarter, about being more efficient with the current dollars that the churches and the nonprofits have to use. That's all this is. And it's really about liquidity. It's about building reserves, okay? Reserves that are in their name, in their control at all times. It's about long-term planning. That's really what this is, because literally, like, when you think of someone's life, it's a long, you know, in our realm of it, you know, it's a long, long time. Right? Mm-hmm. Someone's lifetime. So we're not talking about short-term planning. We're talking about long-term planning. And we're talking about controlling capital. I think that's one of the most important things. If the church, if the nonprofit and all the people that run the nonprofit really focus on the control of the capital that they have and the sustainability of that capital, being your own private bank, having a banking system puts all of that back in the church's control. 100% is sustainable. And because of the nature of the vehicle we're using, which is especially designed whole life, it is guaranteed to have more money next year than it did this year. It can go no other way. I've demonstrated this in hundreds of videos showing the numbers. And that is a really, really important thing for a church, because, you know, the church has the ability to make money, to raise capital and things, but to a certain extent. When their money is working for them, when the church's cash value is working for them 24/7, whether the money's out into a new building, whether the money's out in a community outreach program, that money is still earning for the church, still earning for that future growth, that future of the church. I mean, these are really important things. What if churches, you know, could build reserves, create access to capital, and always do it within their own system without relying on an outside financing? And I think that's what really hurts a lot of churches and ministries, is they're relying on outside capital. And a lot of times the banks, the outside banks, okay, they don't want to finance the project. They don't want to finance the growth, which hurts the community. It really does.
Right. Well, I will tell you that if you study what the word actually says, when, you know, Jesus talked more about money than he did love. And to me, that's a real, okay, wow, it must be super important, you know, and people don't want to connect spirituality with money. And the fact is that because it's such a mindset around money, it has to be, because, you know, I have this saying, if you want to know who your God is, look at your checkbook, because the idea is are you giving to spiritual things or not? But the parable that was told about the rich man that left the talents with each of his servants, the talents were money. This is talking about money. And the first two servants, you know, they went and they doubled the money that they had been given, and the master was so pleased with them. And then the third servant, he was afraid. So he buried it, because, you know, he's afraid if he lost the master's money, he would be mad. And when the master spoke with him, he literally, put damnation on him, because he said, you could have at least put that in the bank and let it have grown some interest for me. And instead you hid it away in fear. Mm-hmm. And when I think about this concept, the infinite banking concept, I'm like, what a great way for the church to be growing the money that's entrusted to them, because we need to be good stewards with our money all the time, even personally. But, you know, I just think that churches, when they hear about this and the opportunity to do that increase while they're able to meet the needs that they already have in the service, I just think that this is going to be exciting for them because, like I said, I never knew about it, being able to help churches. So, guys, you've got a new avenue to look at here for the way your church is doing their financing, where they're storing their money. I mean, Chris, do you have examples that you give on how this works in a church? Like, do you do your whiteboard on these things?
Yeah. So when we met with that pastor and that group, we whiteboarded. We did whiteboards for all of it. But now with the Vault software, the Vault software can show any model that they want to see. You know, whatever the church or the nonprofit wants to do, we can model it all. And then yes, whiteboard is always good because of the visuals. And you know, in today's video, I wanted to not do the whiteboard because I wanted to just show that this is possible, so that next step we can go into the whiteboard, we can model it out, we can show it. But yeah, the Vault allows us to model all of that. And let me mention one other thing that you said that kind of really hit home to me is I don't know the number, but in the Bible, I don't know how many times it says, fear not, do not fear. Right. Yes. And you talked about, you know, that example where he buried the money in fear of losing it. And exactly, like, so in this system that we're talking about, this control makes it so that you should never fear the loss of money or not having enough money, because you'll always have more in this scenario. And the other thing, and I don't mean to keep hitting on it, it is self-completing. So we all will die. And when we die, that death benefit, you know, the self-completing portion is paid out. And then that fuels the next generation. And the other thing too that I think is important to recognize is, you know, I don't think there's a church out there, a ministry out there that doesn't insure their building, that doesn't insure the belongings and you know, the assets of the building. But there are very few of them that insure the person who's holding the mission together. I mean, that's all it is. It's just a shift.
Right.
You're always going to insure the building, but insure the person who has the vision, who is holding that mission together, because that's single-handedly, in some cases, the most important person.
Absolutely, because the fact is that as time goes, things are obviously getting more expensive out here. But, you know, the mission must go on. I mean, it has to, we can't just stop with, you know, thinking, oh, okay, well, the minister's dead, let's shut the church down. And I believe you gave me an average earlier that there's 65 members per, like, average, the churches across the U.S. And when you think about 65 members, with, I think, a lot of them being around 200, say. And then, you know, I've seen churches that have 8 to 10 members, and that's super sad. But when you think about 8 to 10 members funding a ministry, can you really grow on that? I mean, can you really meet the needs of the people if you don't have any more than 8 to 10 people that are maybe paying their tithes? You know, you don't know. And I can just imagine what a boost that would give the next generation. Not that we want the minister to die off, but like you said, we're all going to face Jesus. It's just a matter of time. And when that happens, then they have something to build on and keep making it better. You know, I think we should always be on the increase, whether that be personally or with a ministry, because the fact is it takes money. It takes money to do things. And I think that this is just exciting information. I really do. I'm going to show it to all the ministers I know anyway.
Yeah, I think those statistics don't lie, and it was alarming or really concerning when I read it. I mean, I'll just give them again. 4,000 to 4,500 churches close every year. 1 in 3 churches are financially vulnerable. The average church attendance is 65 people, and 70% of churches have under 100 attendees. So when you think about those numbers, those are statistics. So how do we make sure, or how does a nonprofit or a church make sure that it continues into the future? Well, it does everything we're talking about here, because a big thing that I would think a lot of those closures is the leadership changes unexpectedly.
Yes.
And unexpectedly could be because of a death. And then all of a sudden there's nothing beyond that. But here, when that time happened, okay, when the leadership passed or someone in the leadership passed, what if there was a giant check that came back to the church? Would that church not exist? Would that church not be able to continue? Of course they would. Because the money, and I hate to make it about money, but that allows that church to grow. It allows that church to go out and do what the mission was always about. And it doesn't have to just be because someone passes now all of a sudden there's no directive, there's no future, or the tithing dies down because of, or stops because of COVID scenarios. I mean, COVID is what really kind of opened the floodgates to the problems here.
Right.
And listen, now there's another virus being thrown around in the media. I mean, not going to say that's going to be another one, but just put them. I think nonprofits, ministries, and churches really, really owe it to themselves, owe it to everybody who's part of the church to at least look at this, to say, is this a viable solution to our future problems, and not just future problems, but our problems today? How do we put a plan in place that makes sure that this church continues beyond all of our lives? That's a powerful thing. It really is.
Yeah. Well, since you're the expert here, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions because I know that people have this on their minds. One, what happens if the minister leaves? Okay. Do they have to change up their policies and everything?
Absolutely not. No. So the policy is taken out on the minister. Okay, because there's an insurable interest. So the church owns it. The minister is the insured. If that minister goes on to a better opportunity, goes to a different church or different ministry, doesn't change anything. Okay, that church had an insurable interest, which is why they took the policy out. So that church continues to make the premium deposits on that minister, even though they're no longer there. Now, fast forward into the future, that minister will pass. When that minister passes, then that death benefit will be paid to the church that wore the financial burden, and I don't call it a financial burden, but funded that policy all those years. So that doesn't change anything.
Okay. All right. So the last question is, how does a church minister, how do they get started with this?
They just pick the phone up and give us a call. That's all they do. They get on our calendar, and then we sit down. We do a strategy session to understand what their needs and goals are. What is the problem we're trying to solve for them? Then we will, the second call would be where we'll model it all out. And we're not going to tell them how much they need to save. We're going to ask them how much they're currently saving. Where is their money currently going? And how do we better, structure that current scenario? So we meet the church and everybody there where they're at. And then we just design the plan. And then from there, they just move forward with it. It's not a fast process because there's a lot of moving parts, a lot of things to consider. And one of the biggest things with that other church, one of the biggest things that almost derailed it was they needed flexibility. They have good cash flow today, but they said, well, what if next year something happens and our cash flow is cut in half? So when we designed their structure, we designed lots of flexibility. Maybe they could fund the policy at X today because things are good today. But then what we did is we built a minimum level of funding way, way lower than what their desired funding was today. That created a lot of flexibility. And once they saw that, they said, oh, well, then this is a no-brainer. If we have that flexibility to fund this policy, at this level or to the minimum, then we're comfortable. And that's what got them over the other side of it.
Wow, because I can see that being a big question. So people, you have your information now. You didn't know before, but now you know that there may be an option for your church to be able to really get together and do some planning for the future. Get ready for the next repair that you're going to have to do, or the next increase that you want to do with a building. I mean, and this could even go as far as the churches who provide the car and the homes for the ministers. I just see so many opportunities here, and we wanted to bring this to you today just so that you will know it's even an option. I never heard of it before. So I am so thankful, Chris, that you came on today to give us some insight into how even the church can use the infinite banking concept to change the future of the church. I think we're always talking about legacy of families leaving a legacy for our family. But now this is an opportunity for a church to leave a legacy for the next generation so that they have something to build upon. And I think that's absolutely beautiful. I think that's what's missing, actually.
I think you nailed it. And it's something near and dear. I mean, asking the question, how do we help ministries become stronger? How do we help them become more sustainable so that they can go out and help more people? I think that is the question we need to be asking. And what we're talking about here is just one of the solutions.